Hi.
Hello.
So welcome to a special episode of Inside the Rookery in season 2. I'm joined by fellow Rooks Andy Leask and Graham Davis, and we have our special guest Travis Williams, who was due to join us a couple of weeks ago, but we have rescheduled and he is now here with us today.
Yes.
And we are very excited and very pleased to have you here. So, Travis, you created co-created the World of Darkness in the 90s, and then you moved into video game development, and you're now head of third-party development at Meta Reality Labs. So we really wanted to talk to you about your journey, your career journey from tabletop into video games, and really just... we've got a number of pre-submitted questions that we can bring up and talk through. As always, we've got people in the chat who will have questions. And I'm sorry I'm causing an echo tonight due to some technical glitches. And we will bring up the questions from the chat as well. So
we're known for our slick professionalism in this.
We are.
Well-oiled machine. Well-oiled.
Yeah. It's a feature.
Well, at least no one's muted, right? You're muted. You're muted.
Oh, that's the story of my life. Yeah, I've got this little button on my my cable with a mind of its own.
Yeah. So, Travis, welcome to the show. Do you want me to dive straight into the questions, or do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Well, look. Well, first of all, hello. Thanks for having me. Hello to everyone who took time out of your busy day to listen. These things are like really cool for me, just because I can remember when I was not in the industry. Still, it's a long time ago. But I just remember how special it was to get people who have done this before to actually share, knowledge. So anytime I get the opportunity to sort of, pay it forward, I do so. So thanks for having me again.
We truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I will jump into. We've had questions pre-submitted from our Discord server and patrons from our Inside the Rookery Patreon, and Kilishandra, who every week comes with some killer questions, has asked the first one today, which is, what was your break for moving into video games?
Well, the video games and tabletop RPGs have this sort of incestuous relationship. They feed off of one another all the time. So when I was at White Wolf, every convention, especially Dragon Con and especially Gen Con, you would always meet everyone who made video games. They would come to those shows. And after a while, everyone in video games knew who White Wolf was, right? They'd be like, "Oh, you work for White Wolf," and I'd be like, "You know who I am?" And they're like, "Yeah, we love Vampire, we love Ars Magica." And wow, so I really didn't get pulled. I got pulled into games, and instead of breaking into them, actually, because at the time, and this was the early '90s. There weren't a lot of people who actually knew how to design games, how to design systems, how to do any of those things. I mean, games were very, very simple back then. So if you had any sort of design experience, the video game industry would look at you and go, "Hey, come here, because we need designers." So when I was leaving White Wolf, the first person that really helped me was a producer. His name was Ed DiCastillo, and he worked at Westwood Studios, and he was the producer for Red Alert Command and Conquer. And he says, "I know you want to design games, Travis, and make your resume this way," right? And he spent hours on the phone with me, sort of step by step, what to highlight, what I've done, and so on and so forth. And then after I spent a couple hours on the phone with Ed and him telling me how to construct my resume, I had 4 job offers in weeks, right? So it was really cool. So so don't think that the people who are in games are unapproachable. They're not. Just ask. Most of the
That's
time
the-
they'll help you out.
Yeah, that's the follow-up question, actually. What would your advice be for someone currently writing in tabletop RPGs that was considered working in video games?
Well, so when you're making video games, you have to play them. Like you really do. I liken making video games to cooking. All the metaphors, all seem to work. One of my favorite ones is I don't know if you across the pond you watch like Hell's Kitchen, but
Oh, yeah.
there's always an episode in Hell's Kitchen where Gordon Ramsay says, "Here's a dish. Now eat it." And so they all eat it and they say, "This is delicious." And he says, "Okay, now go make it." Right. And a lot of times, like these people don't know like whether or not they're eating chicken or beef or pork, right? And it amazes me, right? Like they can't do that. Because if you don't know what you're eating, you can't cook it. Right?
Yeah.
In games, if you haven't played these games, you can't recreate them. You really can't, right? So you have to experience them. So play as many games as you can. Okay. And when someone asks you, like, what is your favorite game? Okay, be able to tell them why. Okay, like, because if someone says, "Hey, why does this apple pie taste so good?" You can say, "It's the cinnamon. It's all the sugar. It's all these things," right? When you're making now, so if you're making a dish, like, like that Gordon Ramsay just put in front of you, okay, your charge is simply, "I'm going to make this dish." It doesn't work like that in games. A lot of times they bring you like this huge game with this huge budget. And not only do they say, "Make this," but they say, "Make something better than this." Okay. So know what you're talking about. Like really be a student of games. If something is fun, be able to tell me why. Be able to tell me why something is fun. Why is something highly addictive? Why is something competitive? Because you're going to be asked to recreate it, right? So the best advice I could give anyone who's working in tabletop RPGs is, if you want to go into, computer RPGs or MMOs, for example, know why people play, know why people have fun with them. And it can start with, some very simple things, which are like, the Bartle, types for, gamers. Are you an achiever? Are you an explorer? Are you a griefer? Are you a socializer? Right? And how do and how does this game, sort of forward that sort of, gamer type? That's one of the more basic things. But yeah, be a student.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because we occasionally watch like Bake Off, and there's all of them now. There's like making clothes, and there's making pots, and there's making jewelry, and there's making glass. And Andy Law, who's not with us tonight, and I always turn to each other and be like, "Why would they go on this show if they hadn't made all the cakes? Why would they not go on this show if they hadn't made all the dresses? Like, it drives me mad. Like, how could you put yourself on TV in front of millions of people and be like, oh, I know I've come on the most well-renowned baking show in the world, but I'm not sure what choux pastry is."
Right.
Yeah.
And so when I'm interviewing people, for example, and they're like, "Yeah, I want to make this game," and you're like, "Why?" And they're like, "I don't know." I'm like,
because making games is cool. Yeah.
I mean, I had a game designer actually sit in front of me. And I'm not going to tell you who. He's famous, but and say, "I'm going to make a game," and I go, "Okay, well that's great," and says, "Well, you going to publish it?" "Well, I don't know. Like, what kind of game is it?" He says, "Oh, it's going to cost about $5 million." And I go, and this is in 1995.
Oh, yeah.
And I said $5 million, but you don't have a design document. Like you don't have a plan. And he's like, yeah, I know. And I go, well, how do you know how much it's going to cost? Well, it's just going to cost $5 million. And I go, yeah, I'm not working with you.
Yeah.
I'm just.
Well, that's not a great pitch.
Right. No, it's not. It's
No.
not. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, he still got signed.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had people wanting to get into the games industry, and I'm like, well, okay, we've got, design, programming, art, QA, all the disciplines. What do you want to do? I want to be the guy who has the ideas. And that's, so does everybody else in the world. But, in 30 years in the business, I've never worked on an idea of my own. I've improved other people's ideas. I've brought my ideas to the table, but, being the guy who has the ideas. Yeah, that's, get seriously rich and found your own studio.
Yeah, it's funny because, that's one of my pet peeves. And I talk about it a lot when I talk about how to succeed in this business. And to be quite frank, like no one cares about your ideas.
No, they're the cheapest things in the business.
They don't matter. And the reason they don't matter is because an idea is just an idea. What you need is execution, right? Like if you boil this down to sports, for example, it's a good idea. A good idea is getting 7 Super Bowl rings, right? Yeah. Only Tom Brady has actually been able to execute that, right? Out of everyone in football, right? Like that's who, right? Like when you say, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to dribble this ball, okay, down the court. I'm going to jump over 2 of you and slam dunk it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an idea that LeBron has all the time. Okay. That only he can do. Right. Yeah. You take an idea like I'm gonna take a device, a small device and turn it into a phone. Right. Okay. Well, that's an idea, right? Yeah. And it's been executed by Apple, by Google, and by BlackBerry. Right? Yeah. It's the same idea executed 3 different ways, right? So your ideas just aren't enough. And when you want to actually make cool things, not only do you have to have an idea, but you have to have a plan to execute that idea. And otherwise, who cares?
Yeah. I read about the downfall of Blockbuster the other day, and people think Blockbuster, like its downfall was Netflix, and it was, but it was because when Netflix came to Blockbuster and said, we've got this idea, can you buy us? Blockbuster were like, well, no, because we don't have the money right now. So they knew the idea was good. Netflix had the idea, and Netflix knew they needed money to scale up, but Blockbuster didn't have the money. They were highly leveraged, and so long Blockbuster. So yeah, it's not always, everyone's like, why didn't Blockbuster think of that? Well, they did, but there were things that stopped them from achieving that idea themselves.
Yeah.
White Wolf, we saw Magic the Gathering before it was Magic the Gathering. Because they wanted to license it to become, they wanted to do Vampire Eternal Struggle, right? So we got to see it early. Right. And they said, we don't really have the money to make this game. But if we do, it should be pretty cool. Right. And so there you had an idea. Okay. But they just didn't have the funds to execute it. But when they did, well, the rest is history.
Worked pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's really it. It's all about executing. And if because ideas are so common.
Yeah. Well, that takes me back to when I was playing D&D in college. My group were a real bunch of jokers, and every session started with somebody saying, we kick down the door, we kill all the monsters, we take all the treasure. And I would go back. It became a call and response. I would go back. Let's go over that again in a little more detail. and it's the what is great, but the how is really important. And
That's right.
you know what you were saying earlier, Travis, about playing lots of games and not only getting to like them, but to know why you like them and what you liked about them. There's another level as well, which is the how. After you play enough games, particularly in a certain genre, you can kind of get to look through the skin and see the wheels going around underneath, and you can see how they've done what they've done. And that's when you really start to learn about design.
Yes.
And we do have a question on that, just to dwell on that a bit longer. So how different is the creative approach and process regarding physical and digital game design? How does the walkover from physical tabletop games to digital games impact the creative staff, artists and writers?
When you're making a tabletop game, you create your box. You really do. When you're making digital games, most of the time your box is given to you.
That's it exactly. Yeah.
And to the degree to which you can excel in digital games, it's how creative can you be inside that box. For you to escape that box usually means you have to have some really long, deep conversations with coders, about what you can do. And, you say, well, this box is this big, but can it be bigger? And they're like, I don't know. How much bigger? I don't know. Twice this size? I don't know. For how long? 30 seconds at a time? All right, well, let's try it. Right. And so, so it's always this give and take that you have between, the people who enable your creative vision,
right,
and the people who will get it done. So I think that's the difference is that and the more you're able to understand that box, the more you're able to do with it, right? Coding is language. It really is, right? And because it's language, there's a number of ways you can tell someone to be quiet. You can say, shut up. You can say, cease talking. You can say, I don't want to hear from you. I'm going to mute you, And so the more you're able to actually create the same effect using different tools, the more you're able to take that box and do cool things with. It's all about how creative you can be with a limited amount of resources.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that? Do you think those limitations actually make you, like as a creator, make you even more creative than you would be if you had like unparalleled freedom? Because it's something that I've heard filmmakers say. Filmmakers who started out as indie filmmakers and then became much bigger studio filmmakers, that they themselves have recognized the decline in their quality because they're not constrained. Like Kevin Smith has said it. I think I've heard Edgar Wright say it. I've heard Guy Ritchie say it. Like a lot of directors have said that they found themselves less creative when they have access to more tools than when they were constrained. I don't know.
I think it's a different skill set. I think that there's a some people are more skilled in that than others, and it's really amazing to see like in the box creators work with out of the box creators, and I think that they both bring something sort of unique and magical to the process. And I think that having designers or having creators who are unfettered, for example, you still need that, right? You still need people to say, I don't care about your box, screw your box, right? And then there's someone behind them picking up the pieces going, I can still make this fit. I can still make this fit, right?
I've been there.
And it's needed because they both push and pull each other in glorious ways, right? And if you didn't have someone saying, screw you, I don't care about your box, everything would always be the same.
That's right.
And so, for example, I mean, when I was at Acclaim Entertainment, for example, and they were working on Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam and things of that nature, like the arcade divisions, they could care less about a Genesis or a Super Nintendo. They don't care. They're making their game so that people can continue to pump quarters into it. That's all they care about, and screw you at home, right? And so it's only then when the home guys got this code, and they said, okay, like, we've got 3 buttons. How do we make this work? Right? And that's your solve. That's what you spend your time doing. And depending on how elegant you were about it, would reflect in your sales, most likely.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it for the world. I think that both of those skills are necessary. When I went to, when I started doing more Hollywood type things, like before I was at Meta, I was at Lightstorm, which was James Cameron's movie production house, and I was working on Avatar in different games, and being sat down by film creators and directors and producers and saying, this is how Pandora the world works. Right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, I'm glad I had so much experience in world building during World of Darkness that I can connect all these dots. So I know how to build worlds. Okay, so give me all of your stats, give me everything, right? And then going back to the to the makers of like to James Cameron and John Landau, and saying, you think Pandora works that way? It doesn't. It works this way instead, right? And it's like, why? And I said, well, actually, I can prove it to you with your movies, right?
Nice.
And it's just things that, once again, you've got John and Jim making a movie. Screw your box.
Yeah.
And me going, you want an open world product, right? You want a game that works all the time, right? So I have to make sure this works 24 hours a day and there's no hiccups in how this is presented, right? So yeah, I mean it works, but it's an art form that is very specialized and very stressful.
Hugo asked a very similar question. Considering the limitations of the box, do you believe it's easier in general, or do the limits make you think more? Which is quite similar to what you just asked, Andy.
Yeah, concerning limits in box, do you believe it's easier in general designing? I think it's the same, actually. It really is, and I think that when you actually have a decent rule set that you get from like CRPGs or tabletop RPGs, and you've got the rules, it's cool because that's the end, right? You're solving for this, okay? Right. So so how do I get that effect? How do I get that feeling? How and you can get there a million and varied ways. But yeah, I mean it's I don't think it's necessarily easier one way or the other, actually. And all your really successful tabletop RPGs, they translate really well over to CRPGs, except for Mage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially at the heart of a tabletop RPG is a kind of low yield statistical simulation.
Yes.
So yes. That's a language computers can talk.
Yes, absolutely.
So the next question, I don't know who submitted that. No, it was me. But actually,
I'm not asking for any particular reason.
Yeah.
It's a bit more specific than this. So I'm asking, what advice would you give a young person leaving school who wants to work in the games industry, but as a composer of music, so games music?
So that's specialized. All right.
It is.
And could they do that on top of also games design and production, for example?
Yeah. So music is music is not the same in games than it is in any other medium, right? Because and I remember this. I remember. I think it was LucasArts actually that first came up with iMuse. I could be wrong here, but it was interactive music, right? It was music that had plenty of branching points. And it knew, like, when you're in a stressful situation, when you're in a peaceful situation, when and that's huge. A lot of composers just want to make a score.
Right.
It's not how it works in gaming.
No, there isn't the room to. You can't just sort of let a theme develop because it's going to get chopped up into bits.
Yeah.
So being a gaming obsessive would be an advantage here.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I remember when I first started working in VR, and I was obsessed with turning the camera, right? And that'll make you hurl. It'll make you hurl because you're in a head-mounted display, right? And if you're looking forward and all of a sudden the camera does this, right? No.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're doing a lot of times is you're suggesting action. Right. You're not dictating action. You're suggesting it. So instead of saying turn your head to the left or turn your head to the right, your job is to do this. Right. And then when you turn, now you play. Yeah. Right. When you do all these things, so it's different. Right. It's I'm going to coax you to do certain things. And when you do, I'll reward you. Right. And so that's different. And the same thing goes for music. Right. Instead of hitting people on the head, you coax people into, into something. And then when they do the thing, they're rewarded. I mean, you take games like Final Fantasy, for example, right? People play Final Fantasy just so that they can hear da 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 da, and they're like, "I'm the man. I won. What's happening?" Right? So yeah, if I don't know if you've ever played Peggle, but I beat the board, and it's playing O Fortuna. As soon as you win, you're like, right? So music is very underrated in gaming, but it sets the mood all the time. It's funny. I used to work at Magic Leap, and I'm having my new employee sort of orientation. And I'm sitting next to, and I keep looking at this one guy. I keep looking at this guy next to me. I keep looking at this guy next to me. And I finally go, "You're the fat man." Right? And he's like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Oh my God." It's like, one of the most
he's legendary
game music guys ever. Right. Yeah. And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm sitting next to the fat man," and he's not even fat, but it's funny. I mean, so to more directly answer your question, if you're just getting out, okay, of school, and here's something that people might not want to hear sometimes. A lot of times in games, people could care less where you went to school. Okay, they could care less what you did at school. All they really want to know is what kind of demonstrable skill do you have that you can that you can add to this mix, right? Whether you got it in school or you got it just by learning, most of the time we don't care. We just care that you know what you're doing, right?
That's true.
And so yes, demonstrable skill more so than anything else. So have a good portfolio, if you're in music, show people how you really understand interactive, music, and that will go further than practically anything else. Because no one wants to hear a music demo. I guarantee you, no one does. They would love to see a music demo that's attached to game logic that they can say this person understands this, right? Because music's everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. That was indeed, Seago, a question from the interns. Yeah, it just jumped out of my seat, swinging my dog's bone over my head. That Final Fantasy VII gets me every time. Totally.
No.
I love the chocobo music, chocobo racing music, and then you're like, yeah, I'm all about the chocobos.
It's interesting. Before we get to it, it's sort of quite a segue almost sort of between what I'm going to ask and sort of the next question there from Bastian. But just what you were saying there about kind of VR games and the need to kind of nudge and suggest, and the fact that obviously the player is in control of kind of where they're looking at any given point. It just occurred to me, this is more a speculative thought that just occurred to me. But I watch and review quite a lot of theatre, and I particularly like sort of site-specific immersive theatre that often it's a bit like that. So there's multiple storylines going on, and you decide, in this production of Hamlet, I'm going to go and follow Hamlet. I'm going to miss that scene with Ophelia because that's happening at the same time. And that's a kind of narrative storytelling that we've obviously got some experience of in the tabletop world. Our first adventure, Ship of Fools, that's in layout just now, is exactly that. It's a multi-plot adventure where everything's happening at the same time. And I just wondered, maybe, I'm not very au fait with VR, so maybe this exists, but are there any stories like that where multiple things might be happening and the player with VR gets to choose what to focus on, and other stuff will carry on happening whether you look at it or not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Anytime you get into making open world games or any RPGs or you're gonna have to be okay with that. And it's rough for people sometimes. Right. It is. And it's got to be okay. Everybody, just understand it's gonna be okay, right? It's gonna be okay. But it's sort of like, and I know that. Look, we're in this safe space now, right? We're in this tabletop RPG safe space. We can talk. Everyone who's been a storyteller, DM, GM, has worked all week on something cool that your players don't even experience.
Oh yeah,
right. When you say, oh yeah, I've got this whole cool thing we're gonna do inside this castle, and then they burn the castle down, and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't see
so
that.
true. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and you just have to be okay with that. There's no getting around it. I mean, and it sucks.
But
it's occupational hazard.
I feel like we need a GIF of you saying that it's going to be okay, so that we can share that with our playtesters. Because that was one of the things we got a lot with you.
Yeah.
But as a creator, you're in a kind of privileged position, which I'm usually a player. So Andy Law GMs for us. He's the eternal GM, DM, storyteller through decades of play. And I only realized when we play tested Ship of Fools that the beautiful thing about it was that every group did a different thing, and every group experienced something different. And in one group, maybe one of my favorite characters I had helped to write die, but another group she didn't, and that was amazing. And I think that's something that maybe when you say it's all going to be okay, that's why, because everyone's going to experience your creation in a different way,
right?
And that's lovely.
It is, because you I guess I've come to terms with this after a while. Like, everyone's just not going to have the same experience, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. And also, it's not your game.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if I take it to tabletop RPGs, for example, like, when you go to a convention, people are like, let me tell you about my story. Right. Okay. And you go, that's not how I would have played mage or werewolf or vampire, but
right.
But you see their eyes and they're like, oh my God. And you're like, who am I to screw with that? Right.
Yeah.
That's it. That's you got exactly, you didn't do it the way that I did, but you're clearly having fun.
Yeah,
right?
that's something that I get a lot with people, particularly with the new enemy within campaign coming out. People, how should I approach this? How should I do this? How should I do that? And people asking me, and I'm like, however you do it is fine. If you're having a good time, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, you're doing it right. Yeah,
that's all that matters.
Yeah, and the funny part is that that's a lot of times that's where we would get our inspiration. That's where we would get a lot more sort of, we would get these ideas from people that's telling us these insane ways they took things, and we'd be like, I don't know, there's a seed of brilliance in there.
That's the story of our playtest process right there.
Yeah. In the White Wolf magazine, in the catalogue, so it must have been what Andy and I were living in the Royal Mile, so it was like 1997, right? The White Wolf catalogue had in it, write up your Transylvania Chronicles adventures and submit it to us so we can see it and we might pick stuff from it. And we never finished our Transylvania Chronicles for another, I don't know, 20 years. So we never submitted ours, but I love that idea that and if we had done it a bit more quickly, but unfortunately we had like mountains of notebooks of mostly mine of like detailed of where Anatolia had gone and what Kupala had said and real world research about what Kupala was and everything. So we went in a little bit too much depth, but I really liked that idea because it showed a creator that was like it's all of our worlds. And we won't. We tell your story, but we'll listen to your stories, and they'll bring something to us.
That's actually how I got my start. I was in high school, and my mother decided that we weren't going to live in Louisiana anymore. We were moving to Georgia. We were moving to Atlanta, and I had been running a Ars Magica story for 3.5 years throughout high school. And I was sad because I had to leave my gaming group to move to Atlanta, Georgia. And so I took all of it, photocopied it, and sent it to Lion Rampant, right? And then I got a letter back from Lisa Stevens saying, this is really good. Do you want to publish it? And I remember because I was barely 18, right? And I was like, oh my God. And I go, no, I can't because these aren't my stories. These are the stories of all my players. I don't own this stuff. I was the storyteller, but and she said, oh, okay. And I said, but I'm sad because I have to leave them to go to Atlanta. And she said, well, we have an investor in White Wolf, and his only edict is that we move to Atlanta, so that that we can do this. And I'm like, oh my God! So when you get here, let me know. I'll show you around. Right? Turns out I knew the Ars Magica rules better than Mark Hagan and Lisa and Stuart and so on and so forth.
That's so often the case.
Yeah,
because of course you do. Because fans
exactly
you're actually using it. Yeah.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So you can tell I'm listening to the advice that I give people, right? Just do it, just know it, and you'd be amazed at.
Yeah, so on that note, we did get a question in from Seagoat. So I love Mage the Ascension, a big fan of Vampire the Masquerade, by the way. Do you have any behind the scenes anecdotes you can relate to us mere mortals from your time working on Mage or Werewolf?
I think that when we were working on Mage, Stuart did not show us the manuscript for Mage for a long time. And we were like, what's going on? Right. And so he finally shows us the manuscript and we're like, oh my God, do you guys get this at all? Right. And they were like, no, not really. And we're like, okay, so who's going to tell Stuart? Right. And so it was almost like we had an RPG intervention. And we sat down and we said, look, Stuart, we're all pretty smart. we don't understand this. We understand what you're trying to do, but this isn't it, right? And so just imagine having to go in and tell your successful bosses, both Stuart and Mark, that they don't get it.
Yeah.
Right. And we said, we're going to write this. So you just sit back and relax while we save the company. And in a month and a half, all of the creative staff at White Wolf rewrote Mage.
Wow.
And I talk about that all the time, and not because it was crucial, not because, it was high risk. It wasn't that. It was that, sitting around a table with Andrew, with Rob, with Bill, Phil, just all the, all the heads of all of the, the games that we have done before, and said, we're going to do this. And we met every day, hours at a time, banging it out, to the point where when we would have morning meetings and I'd be like, hey, are you good? Yeah. And they'd be like, are you good? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm good. And we just sat in a room and got it done. Creatively, I have never felt that high again.
I can imagine.
My entire career.
Yeah.
Right? Just knowing that the people that I'm sitting around here are the best at what they do. They're damn good. And I don't have to worry, because if I ask Andrew, what's up? He's got it. Phil got it. Bill got it. Rob got it. Right. And I, and to this day, I still think that Mage is, it's that game that gets me emotional, just, every time. And not just because it's such a cool concept. It is just because, wow, the creative people that I got to work with, just blew my mind.
Mm-hmm. I think the World of Darkness itself, and the different games in it, I think had a huge impact. So, I talked before on a previous stream, and I mentioned it to you, Travis, that I grew up in a rural area with no TV, and I knew that I wasn't like people around me, but I didn't know what other people were like, who I could be like. And so I found my tribe through World of Darkness. I went up to my best friend, who's still my best friend today, 25 years later, in the music department, and was like, do you want to come and be a vampire with me? And she was like, yeah, not even knowing what I was talking. I could have been offering to embrace her right there and then, and she would have been like, yes, I'm down with that. And I got some of my old books. I brought them through. Nice. And the thing about that always struck me about them was, in the back you had all of those archetypes, and they looked like people. Nobody I knew looked like that. But some people like me wanted to look like that. And was that done on purpose? Did you go out there to bring that to people like me, or were you just doing it because that's what you were doing?
We did it because it was us. It was us. You had to be weird to work at White Wolf. You did. I mean, I remember we one of our artists, Michelle Praler, she was having an interview, and we were like, what version of what layout what layout program are you using? And I can remember that she sort of steeled herself a little bit. She thought about it for a good 10 seconds. It seemed like her eyes rolled back, in her head. She put her head down for a good 2 seconds, and she came back up and she said, PageMaker. And we were like, that was weird. Yeah, she's going to work out just fine. She's going to work out. Yeah. She knows what she's doing, and she's weird, right? Like Rob Hatch, who was one of our more successful editors. I remember we're just in the house, like doing work. and there's a knock on the door, right? It's some guy, and he literally doesn't even say hello. He says, "You guys need an editor." First of all, how'd you find us? You know, second of all, okay. And is that you? Okay, because you know, we do need an editor, right? Like that was the weirdness, right? Like, you know, so we had people that are introverts, extroverts. We had gay people, we had bi people, we had trans people, we had, you know, we had black people, we had white people. Like we were like the united colors of weirdness.
You had women, which actually in tabletop role playing was not always a given that you would have women.
Far from it.
Yeah, and you know, and a lot of that started with us just saying, you know, as far as pronouns are concerned, we'll just use she as neutral in books, and that was a conscious effort that we made.
Yeah.
And I can't, and you know, and it was we just wanted to be inclusive, right? Because we felt like, hey man, you know, like if we can make this not repulsive to people who you know would be in our tribe, why the hell not?
Yeah.
Right? And it worked. Right?
It did work.
And it wasn't. It really wasn't because we wanted to sell more books. It was because we were like, we're on the outside, and if we can somehow be cool and allow other people to be cool too, that are weird like us, why not?
Yeah. And Vampire was actually the perfect vehicle for that, because, you know, if your main setting is the club scene of the late 80s, early 90s, you just could not get away with making everybody white and straight. And
Yep.
it just would be pointless.
And vampires in general, we were talking before, are so, gender is so irrelevant when you're 100, 500, 1,000. What does it even mean anymore when, you know, Travis, you say you feed off people?
Yeah.
Why would you care? And it opens up a whole new discussion.
Yeah, it's funny because vampires were just, you know, it's just super humanity, right? It's like whatever we were as a human, just turn it to 11 and that's you as a vampire, right? So, you know, if you're an artist, whoa, are you an artist? You know, if you're a combatant, whoa, are you a combatant? Are you a racist? Wow, were you racist? Right? And so so all these things, and it appealed to people, you know, because you were just more of who you already were, right? And it allowed people to do things. And I wish I would have known back then how popular LARPing would have become, right? Because it was something that we sort of dipped our toes in, and we're like, I don't know, people gonna think we're really weird. You know, turns out not so much.
Well, I think, you know, White Wolf and Mind's Eye Theatre pretty much revolutionized LARPing. It suddenly there was more to do than just hit things with rubber swords.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. It was just amazing. And you know, and the funny part was we had a club. Like the first LARPing that we did was at a club in Atlanta called The Masquerade.
Oh,
wow.
Nice.
So all those pictures from Mind's Eye Theater, like in you know, the first edition, all those were inside of a club called The Masquerade. It was really cool.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Nice serendipity.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, I mean, it was, I don't know if we really knew, like, you know, how impactful we were going to be. You just knew it was cool. And I knew we were on to something, you know, and you know, I still remember like being on the phone with Tim Bradstreet, bribing him to do our full page pictures, you know, for Vampire, because we just didn't have the kind of money that he was demanding at the time to do the pieces, right? And he was on the phone with me, and he's like, and if I want more copies of these books, I better get them. And I'm like, yeah, man, I'll steal from the company to give you books. I'll do whatever I need to do, and he's like, all right, I'll do the pictures, Yeah. So it was just a really special time. I mean, I look back on it romantically because it I can't explain to you, like, how cool it was to just be there.
Yeah.
I think when you look back at it as well, I feel like Werewolf, so like ahead of its time almost, like the themes of Werewolf and the environmental kind of warriors, like it's very much like what we're facing today. And the same with in terms of Mage, like the idea in Mage that you can, that the world can change, like that's the dark side of social media today. Like I think there are so many themes that I didn't realize how relevant they would become. Maybe that's just because you were ahead of us, because you were in the States writing it and we were like here.
No, it was just it was just being unfettered, actually. I mean, it was it was cool being around a bunch of people who took imagination seriously, right? And when Stuart said, Travis, like, at the cusp of this, as far as Mage is concerned, like reality is an agreement between the observing individuals, right? And I went, dude,
Yeah.
I can't even conceive, my mind, like, and Bill, with Werewolf saying, oh, the Guru will lose. Just not today.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
I just think that whole, like, reality is an agreement, and you look around now and, like, the worst aspects of that and that technomancy, like, that it's coming true. Like, it is an agreement, and they're agreeing on the wrong things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've got, in the States in particular, we've got two separate groups of people agreeing among themselves.
Yes.
That the other side is not real.
Yeah. It's amazing,
Yeah.
It's like, it's prophetic.
Yeah. I feel like I do, I do love to bring up the questions, but now I feel like I'm going to pivot back from that really profound insight into modern day technomancy to do the needs of a computer game, save points, health points, mana, etc., have any impact on the storytelling? But I do think it's quite relevant because we've just been talking about LARPing, and it is so different in LARPing with the way you interact and health and save points, etc., versus computer games versus the tabletop.
It does. The needs of computer games, save points, health points, mana, have an impact on storytelling. Absolutely. But the cool part about that is that they have an impact, but maybe not what you think. Rules influence gameplay. Right? They just do. Right? If it's easier to heal, I'm going to be a little bit more reckless. If I'm playing an MMO and I have a healer, for example, I'm going to run in a battle when someone's got my back, right? But these tropes or these things mean things like, if you're playing a computer game, for example, and you see this huge door in front of you, right? And right next to that huge door is a save point. Guess what? There's an ass whooping on the other side of that door.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that save point is the designer saying, "I'm sorry, but this is going to hurt." Right. So those things do have impact.
They do.
And you have to ask yourself sometimes, as a designer, as a game maker, what are you trying to do at the end of the day? Right? Are you trying, because some designers, for example, hate players. They just do, right? They just want them to have the worst time or the hardest time possible. Yeah. I'm not one of those people. I feel like I play games for escapism. I play games most of the time because I think that the world is too mundane and sucks. And I can go somewhere else where I can save the world. Right. And I can be cool. So I like to play those games. I generally don't like to play games that are really, really tough because life is tough enough. I don't need help.
Yeah, well, as with designers, so with GMs. I remember from the very early days of Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's maybe less prevalent now, but there was a school of thought that it was the GM versus the players, and the
Yes.
GM could win by engineering a total party kill.
Yeah, which I always found interesting, right? Like, what is that about? Like, at the end of the day, I feel like if your characters die, I feel like that's a failure, right? For me, I never really like to kill characters as much as I like to stress them out. And make players like, nervous and things of that level.
Absolutely.
So if I'm playing a tabletop game, for example, and I know like a character that these like my players fear. Right. And then I have an NPC just kick the crap out of that guy. Right. And they're like, whoa, that other guy must be really powerful because he's been kicking our butt like for 2 years. Right. I don't want to mess with him. And that's more that meant more to my players than like, hitting them and doing so much damage that they are knocked out like instantly. Right. It's setting the mood. And, if it's done right, at least in my opinion, your players are doing most of the work. Right? That's right. Like your players, you're only responding to them. Yeah. Right. Instead of them responding to you. Right. And it I guess it just depends on what you feel like your job is as the storyteller.
Yeah, we've talked before, and I think we should explore it more about how tabletop can learn from computer games. So the idea of a save point in that kind of Prince of Persia way, like, no, that's not how the story went, and offering that to your players. And maybe the next time something tweaks happen, because computer games have replayability in a way that tabletops sometimes, well, often in the past haven't. So that would be something interesting to explore. I'm just aware that you have to go.
Oh yeah!
Right up in like 3 minutes because you have a meeting that you need to go to straight after, and I do want to have a little bit of time to say thank you very much for joining us. I loved that. That was amazing.
Thanks for having me.
It was. The time went far too quickly.
It did. So if you ever want to come and talk to us again on a follow up, we would love to have you.
I do.
Very cool.
Brilliant.
Come on, I always like nerding out. Learning out is cool.
And we do like to nerd out.
Yeah. We really, really do.
Yeah, invite me back. I'll come. I promise.
Brilliant. So thank you, Travis. Thanks, Andy and Graham. Thanks to everyone in the comments and people watching after on YouTube. Please do like and subscribe. This coming Saturday, we've got Gav Thorpe, who some of you will know from Games Workshop of old, and Gav is coming to talk to us at the weekend. So we will see you all then. And until then, have a lovely evening or whatever time it is with you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.